This podcast is a member of the Place to Be Nation family. Visit us at placetobenation.com, the only place to be in your pop culture world.
All right, getting back in here on Diamond Conversations as part of the Place to Be Podcast Network. Sitting in the chair and looking across to a beautiful scene right behind my guest today, looking at a beautiful baseball diamond as I am joined by podcaster, broadcaster, writer, and also commentator for the Burlington Royals. I'm welcoming in a rising star in the broadcasting world, Alex Feuz, joining me today here on Diamond Conversations. And Alex, man, I'm really happy to have you come on the podcast this week.
Thanks so much for having me. I was looking forward to joining this show and talking with you today.
Yeah, it's pretty cool to be chatting with you at this time. I know you'd rather be sitting in the broadcast booth getting ready for a minor league baseball game, but nonetheless, the world had to stop and get in the way and interrupt that. And I want to get to that here in just a minute. But as you navigate through the social media world, as you're trying to kind of get yourself settled here, how are you doing in this new normal, the new world that's going on?
Hanging in there, of course. I'm in upstate New York. I'm safe in my home. I don't really leave my home too much. I do work at an ice cream place. I've worked at an ice cream place for 4 years. I started working there as a junior in high school. It's like a family-owned, not my family, but it's a small business. So we opened up on St. Patrick's Day, and we had lines out to the road. And we decided to close down for a few weeks because that was right at the height of the stay-at-home measures. That's what everyone wanted, stay at home. And we closed for about three and a half weeks, and then we reopened just about over a month ago now. We reopened the last week of April, and we've been open ever since. So I've been there almost every single night, and it's been busy. It's gave me something to do other than just sit at home. So I'm back serving ice cream as I was in high school. But it's fun. It's fun. I get to answer the phones. I like to pretend I'm broadcast on the phone sometimes. And it's fun, right? It's fun.
Hey, you know what? We can say we knew you when you were scooping ice cream as the podcast is going to take off in the baseball season and hopefully restarts at some point. But that's good that you're keeping busy and channeling the roots and going back to scooping, 100%. if you will. But let's talk about it first. You were slated to start your first season in the booth for the Burlington Royals, which is an Appalachian League affiliate of the Kansas City Royals. But obviously that was, put on hiatus for the time being. Kind of talk about what that's been like that, obviously, a huge achievement, a huge dream of yours to get in the booth and then kind of put the pause button into effect and wait for this all to clear and hopefully get back to baseball. Yeah.
You go from getting a position, like you said, that I've always wanted. I've always wanted to be able to, say, oh, I'm, calling a professional baseball game tonight. And, when I got the position back the first week of January of this year, I was excited. And I've, done some articles and some interviews with past B Royals players throughout the last few months and stuff like that. And it was, I was supposed to be there. I was supposed to leave last weekend. I was supposed to move down there. I would have already been down there for a week and a half up to this point, and I'm still in upstate New York right now. And with the season on pause, who knows? Does Major League Baseball play? I mean, that's people keep asking, and oh, Alex, what do you think of minor league baseball? Are they going to play? Well, and I said, honestly, if you ask Commissioner Manfred right now if the minor league baseball are going to play, if minor league baseball is going to play, he would laugh at you because we don't know if or when Major League Baseball is going to play. That's the priority right now. They aren't worried about minor league baseball right now. They are, but the priority right now is to let's get Major League Baseball back. Not even just Major League Baseball, baseball. I know we got KBO over in South Korea, but the priority should be right now is let's get Major League Baseball back on the field, and that's what's next. Once we figure out what's happening there, then we can turn our attention to, okay, what are we doing with the minor leagues? Are we going to do a AAA, AA, and then put the rest on pause? How is this going to work? So many questions and no answers right now. But to your point, it is, upsetting. But again, it's affecting everyone.
Right.
This was one of the thoughts that I had was, wait a second, while this is affecting me in this way, it's affecting everyone else in another capacity. There is not one person on the face of the earth that is not being affected by the coronavirus pandemic right now. And it's unfortunate that this happened. But again, you have to try to find the silver linings and anything possible right now and just try to stay positive and to think that we will have baseball either this year. If not this year, it's going to be back next year. So again, you just have to stay positive at all times.
That's a great outlook. Yeah, because I mean, I know personally I'd be devastated right now, and knowing where I would be, when having worked in the minor leagues and knowing that atmosphere and being around the ballpark on game day is an out of this world feeling. And you're taking a real great approach to it, and I commend you for it because in seeing how I've watched your podcast evolve and seeing how you've gotten some great opportunities. You're still a very young guy and you're making a lot of strides, and it's very admirable to see that you have such a positive outlook on things. I got to tell you, man, that's a great quality to have. Don't lose that. Don't lose that whatsoever.
Thank you. When I could never, I still have 2 years left of college, right? I'm going to be a junior in the fall. I could not imagine what position I would be in if I'm a senior right now. Or if I'm just graduating and I'm going out into this job market. I am incredibly grateful to have the ability to think, okay, I still have 2 years left of school.
Right.
I can't imagine what people are going through right now. Even just in the job market as itself. You could have been as established as possible as a journalist, as a reporter, as a broadcaster, and still be out of a job right now. So right. I can't even imagine what position some people are feeling right now. And it hurts, it breaks my heart to think, if you are in the sports industry, you have a passion for this. And at the end of the day, sometimes you can't always go for your passion because nothing's there. And sometimes if there isn't a job that you have a passion for, you have to go back and scoop ice cream. And while it's fun and exciting, I love doing it. It's a fun working environment. I've been there for 4 years now. Sure, I would love to be working at a baseball field, right? Going to the field every single day, going to the ballpark, talking with the players, the coaches, other broadcasters. But you have to make with what you have right now. And the reality is we don't have baseball right now. Right. And that's the outlook you have to have with everything, because if you didn't, it would kind of be game over, in my opinion. You always have to stay positive whenever you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. And kind of right in the first chapter in the book. And it seems like, to start out earlier in your career, have 2 years left of college, kind of have the achievements that you've had thus far. Again, chapter 1 before we get to the actual gameplay, the baseball season. And I think what you've really been able to do here as you've been home and as you've been scooping ice cream and waiting to get on the road and get back to school and do all the great things that you're doing, you've kind of built this really cool media profile for yourself with your podcast, the whole story, which I got to be honest with you, like seeing as somebody who's interviewed people for many, many years, to come out of the gate the way you have with your show and the sports dignitaries that you've had, the broadcasting legends, it's great. I mean, and what an awesome, narrative you've built for your show is that, like, this is where the legends are coming to speak to the future. You know what I'm trying to say? Like, if I put it like that, kind of talk about the podcast and how it's evolved. And I feel like during this pandemic, you've been able to grab some great guests and kind of help your platform grow.
100%. And, it's funny that you say that, because actually this week it will be 6 years since I started a podcast. I was in 8th grade, and I was sitting in my living room upstairs holding an iPad very too close to my face, almost like grandfather-esque. And I said in the video something along the lines, on June 4th, 2014, it is going to be a start of a new beginning. And I said, the Alex Feuz Show, starting weekdays on YouTube. And if you listen back to it, I was whispering because I didn't tell anyone I was doing this. And my parents were downstairs, and I didn't want them to think, what the heck is Alex doing upstairs? So if you listen back to like the first or 2 episodes, I'm whispering because I literally told no one. And then some of my closest friends started finding out about it. And then that's when it started gaining the traction. And, first started doing interviews on that podcast while still in high school, and built connections and relationships throughout the years. And then this podcast, the Story Podcast, I started back in January. The first 3 episodes, Emily Walden, Jessica Kleinschmidt, and Danny Vietti of CBS Sports, where I started this podcast. It was during winter break from school, and I wanted to do long form interviews. It's something I always loved to do, but never really had the time for. And during winter break, I was kind of sitting on my hands. There is no ice cream during the winter time. So I was having that extra time at home, and I said, you know what? I'm going to start this. And then I did 4 episodes, and the 4th one was with Jesse Agler of the San Diego Padres radio play-by-play voice. And then I got busy with school and got a lot of things going on there. So took a pause from the podcast. But then as soon as the pandemic hit and I was home, there wasn't really a lot going on. So that's when I started ramping up. And we've done 35 episodes of the podcast, which is crazy to think about. And it's pretty cool to see how this podcast has grown, not really just from a numbers standpoint, but just the impact it has had on some people. Right. I've had younger broadcasters that I go to school with that listen to the stories that they're telling. For example, Adam Schefter, who graduated from college and couldn't find a job for 2 years. Who is now one of the most prominent sports media aspects, top inside reporter that you can think of. Yeah. Who is a senior insider with ESPN, followed by over 7 million people on Twitter, couldn't find a job for 2 years, had to go back to grad school, and then through grad school was able to find a job at a newspaper. Those are the stories, because I think so many people look at Adam Schefter and see 7 million people. I'm tweeting, I'm still doing this, but I'm not really getting anywhere. And then they give up. Right. But they don't realize Adam Schefter didn't graduate college and boom, ESPN, 7 million followers. It takes work. It takes dedication. It takes failing for you to really grow in this industry. And I think doing this podcast, I hope, the goal is to show that it's not an overnight success. It can't be. And I think, honestly, if someone could take away and listen to the podcast and realize that it takes years and years of calling minor league baseball games, it takes years of podcasting and in your mother's basement for you to be successful, and to show that there is something better after some failure. That's what I'm looking for most. It's, to show that the stories and to hear the stories of some of the most successful people in the broadcast industry, that if I stick with this maybe just one day longer, I could have some sort of success.
Yeah. Long form interviews are great, and that's how obviously I started to get into the podcasting world, is not being able to get a broadcasting job and just saying, you know what, I'm just going to roll the dice, and ended up going with the genre that I knew very well with pro wrestling. And 6 years later, I've been able to move on to doing a passion project and doing a baseball show. So if you don't give up and you do stay with it, ultimately you do get what you want, and people do recognize it. And it's, again, it's just, you're wise beyond your years for having that kind of mentality, because there are people who are 35, 40 years old that sit there and look back and they say, maybe I could have done that. Maybe I could have done this, but never pulled the trigger. And yeah, Adam Schefter completely stood out as I ran down your guest list. Howie Rose joined Twitter. The next day he was on your show. That completely blew me away. Dave O'Brien, who you seemingly seem like old buddies, the two of you, the way you interact together. And it just, hold yourself with these broadcasting legends, like you've been at the bar with them for forever, your whole life. So that's what I really dig about you being able to interview these guys is letting them almost kind of come to you, and they're not giving you canned speeches. They're not giving you canned topics. You're talking to them peer to peer. And I find that to be very cool. And I'm sure for you, you're over the moon with that.
Well, thank you for that. It's what I do. I don't think I've ever told anyone this, but what I do when I'm preparing for an interview. So, for example, it depends on the guest, right? So Adam Schefter, for example, I'll use him, who's doing multiple interviews every single day with so many other people, right? He's been asked the same questions thousands of times, and he gives the same textbook answers. What I like to do with an approach of a podcast, let's say I'm interviewing Adam Schefter tomorrow. First, I'll listen back to my interview I did with him last time, right? And I'll make a note. Don't ask him these questions. He already did. But also, I like to listen to other podcasts he's gone on. Not to see what kind of questions he's been asked, but listen to his responses.
Right.
If I start hearing where it's like he's giving me the same responses to all of those questions.
The greatest hits, if you will.
Yeah, the greatest hits. If I start hearing, let's say, what's one thing you learn most interning here? And I hear listening back to textbooks, reading, writing, I'll sort of develop a new question to get a new answer. I'm very big in listening to, or even writing down quick questions to maybe make it more broader in one of his other follow-up answers for a first question. It's how can I get someone to think out of the box to give me answers they've never told before, stories they've never told before, maybe expanding on stories that they never really been able to do. That's kind of my approach with the interviews. I'm sure other people had the same approach, but I'm big in listening back to just, for example, Schefter did a 2-hour speech at his alma mater for a grad school about being in the sports media. So I listened to the whole 2-hour thing and listening to him tell his stories. And I wrote down some questions that I had through that. And that's kind of where I kind of gain, okay, this is a question I can ask him. To know that you do your research, to not where you're just shooting off the hip, favorite moment, or biggest, life accomplishment, when he's already said it 10 other times on previous podcasts. It's the little details. If, for example, he's given that same 10 response of, oh man, I really look back to this time that makes me smile. I'll ask about that specific time. What was it like interning at that, radio station, for example, and he's already said, I could be like, for example, Adam, you talked about before many other times about how much you love looking back at your time at this radio station. What did that mean to you? Something like that, to where it's almost like you already know information without them knowing it.
Right.
And, that's what I love to do because it's a mutual respect. It's something, wow, he spent time on looking back at what I've already done. So it's that too, and I just love interviewing people I look up to and interviewing people that I respect in the industry. And that's really been one of my favorite parts about doing this podcast.
Yeah, and I can't even forget to leave out Bob Costas too. That was the other one that really stuck out like a sore thumb is, again, like being able to get to these guys early in your career. And it's almost like, and I feel it comes off conversational in the fact that, Dave O'Brien shared a story with you about writing a letter to Bob Costas when he was trying to get jobs when he was coming out of Syracuse, and Bob Costas writing him back. It's almost like now you're getting the chance to talk to these guys early in your career, and you can take little pieces of each story and kind of build your own future. And it's like I said, it's like sitting at a bar stool, and being able to chit chat with the guys and get that one-on-one advice. It's very unique, and it's got a different flavor to it than other sports podcasts. Because to be honest with you, I can't listen to regular sports podcasting because to me it gets kind of boring. It gets a little, monotonous. It's the same stuff you hear all the time. I mean, I tend to just listen to regular sports radio. And I have tapped into my radio.com app to listen to WFAN in New York. I would choose that over listening to a sports podcast, but I really love the way you approach the broadcasters. And it's like I said, it's like listening into advice, and giving to somebody one-on-one.
100%. And I feel like I'm now slowly getting there because, it's a niche market, right? If you're a sports fan, or maybe, for example, you're not a sports fan, why do I care about broadcasters telling me advice? So I think this kind of goes in. It's not really maybe, I think there is that advice component to it, but also you could just be a sports fan and just get a kick out of listening to them tell stories of them failing on a broadcast. Some crazy technology, of them not being able to be on air or something along those lines. So I think it all goes into the bigger picture of it, where it can be a niche market. It can just only be, for example, I'm a, first year sports broadcasting student at insert school, and I really like listening to, so-and-so talk about their career, but it also could be for the sports fan or maybe even the non-sports fan. So I think it's how can I appeal to a large audience, but deliver to the niche markets into itself. So I think that's something I try to look into it and try to ask the broader questions at some points of an interview, but also take a little deeper dive into some of the responses throughout, but also maintain that conversation.
Yeah.
So a good example of that was Jason Fitz of ESPN, who I looked up to tremendously because, at college, I have a morning radio show. And every morning before we went on the air at 7 a.m., from 6 to 7, I was watching Golick and Wingo. And Jason filled in for Wingo when he was on vacation after the Super Bowl. And I really you feel like you get to know these people because, as you know, radio is a very open conversation, right? Like if you are on the radio every single day, you have no privacy because it just comes out if you're good at it, where it's like, yeah, I was talking to my dad last night, or, oh my gosh, coming into the station this morning, my windshield washer fluid light came on because I held on the wiper button too long. It's those little things where it's like, oh my gosh, I almost just fell in a hole coming into the studio this morning or slipped on ice. It's that, if you're good at doing radio, you feel like if you listen to it every day, the person. You're sitting at that dinner table having a drink with a person or having, fried pickles, an appetizer or something like that. So I think that's kind of, if you are good at this, where, for example, you felt like you knew Jason Fitz, for example, for myself, and that was a fun conversation because for the most part, we didn't really talk too much sports. Jason was a musical director for the band Perry and a fiddle player for them. And he's won Grammys in the music industry, but now he's also now in the sports industry, and we talked about the music industry. We talked about, I asked him, do you still listen to country music? Who is someone you love listening to? It's those questions. It's, I always like to shy away from sports the whole interview because at the end of the day, sometimes it's fun to just talk about other things besides sports because if you work at McDonald's, you won't want to eat McDonald's breakfast, lunch, and dinner.
Right.
So that's what I love to do, is ask some questions that they don't really get to talk about too much.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And that's the formula for conversational interview, essentially, because when you get them talking, then eventually, if you do want to dial back and get to the nuts and bolts, they may give you a little bit more than you had anticipated earlier. They might come off a little. It's like a boxer. You start here, and eventually they drop the gloves a little bit because they're getting tired. But when you're conversating and they're starting here, they start to move down, you get more. And you're absolutely right. And those are the best interviews, are the conversations that dig deep into essentially the topic, which is the person. So speaking of the person, let's talk about you before we get into our wrap up. So you're supposed to start this gig here down with the Burlington Royals. You're still in college. What's the outlook for you? What are you looking to do as you kind of get into this gig and still have time to finish school? Where's the outlook for you with this job specifically, and what you're going to do with school?
Well, I love broadcasting, and baseball play-by-play is a large passion of mine. I have only done 1 year of it, though. Last summer, I was in the NECBL calling baseball games for the New Bedford Bay Sox in New Bedford, Massachusetts. And I called just under 50 games last summer. And I was really looking forward to getting my reps, getting just to figure out who I am as a broadcaster calling baseball games. I think I figured out who I am as a broadcaster from a larger perspective. It's telling stories. And I know that's broad, and really any good broadcaster wants to tell stories. And what I mean by that is to make players relatable, to make coaches relatable. Love just being a professional storyteller, 5 years from now. I would love to do that. It's he loves to eat 3 chicken nuggets and 5 French fries before every game. It's those little fun facts that make you get to know or think you know the player more without even never meeting that player in your life. That's what I love most. So I figured that part out. And to be completely honest with you, I haven't done a lot of writing. I love to write. So I think if it's, to kind of change your question a little bit of what the outlook is for me, I would love to get into something where I can write about whatever in sports, and I'm hoping that I get to do that very soon, where, I get to, I can do it on my own platform, but, on another platform. I think that's what I would love to do. I love reading The Athletic every single day. So doing kind of long form articles, something like that, but also a quick hit, top 5 shortstops that you may have forgotten, doing little fun things like that, where it's thinking out of the box, being creative in some capacity, and telling, just a little fun story. So I think that's what I would love to do more of. I know I've done some writing for the Burlington Royals. It's tough right now because there is no baseball. But again, it's just getting more involved with writing. I think that's what I would love to do next.
Yeah. I mean, there's again, you open up your own Pandora's box, and you said you could do it on your own, but you have that goal of maybe latching on with somebody. And look, in this day and age, the next Barstool could be around the corner. The next version of The Athletic could be right around the corner, because there's always people thinking there's always somebody that's got the next great idea and the next big show or the next big thing. But you've got a lot of time left. You've got a lot of stuff that you can still do in your career. So let's look at it from the podcast perspective. You got, 30 something episodes into the current one that you're working on. You've talked to Bob Costas. You've talked to all these great guys. Who's somebody that's on your radar that you're just really dying to get on and pick their brain?
There's a couple. And Rich Eisen would be on the top of my list. I love Rich. Dan Patrick, phenomenal interviewer. I think when I look at people that are great interviewers, Dan Patrick is on the top of my list. And I'll never forget a time where I interviewed Ken Rosenthal. And after the interview, I think this was the second or third time I interviewed him, and he texted me after. He said, "Quick advice for you. Don't say, or really add a non-substance follow-up to then go into a next question. And I listened back to the interview, and for example, if Ken Rosenthal finished a response, I was like, "Oh yeah, that sounds great." And then I would go into my next question.
Yeah.
And he said, "If you have nothing to add of substance or a follow-up question, go right into the next question. Just go right into it. And if something comes up throughout the interview that you need to go back to, do it." Now, obviously, don't do that after every other question, because then you're jumping all around and then it's confusing as a listener.
Right.
But if it's 1 or 2 times in an interview, do it.
Yeah.
And when I heard that, and then I started listening to other people do interviews, and Dan Patrick is the best at doing this, is Dan Patrick would just ask questions. Questions that are going along with a conversation to where it is a conversation. And I've always, obviously, I have not perfected it yet, but it's something I work on every single time, is how can I formulate questions to then make them sound smooth, and then also not jump all around as a listener? How can I make this as, it's like, how can I present this meal as best to digest? You don't want a 1-star meal. You want a 5-star meal, right? How can I make a listen? Because you can jumble, you can have, let's see, a good prop for this. You could have these questions, favorite star, or favorite sports movie, blah, 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 and go down the whole list. And you'll jump all around. Or you could kind of come up with a game plan, but also know when to jump away from that game plan and scratch the 3 questions because something more prominent came up in an interview.
Right. Exactly.
So those are the things where you have to think on the spot in interviews, but also at the same time, know where you want to go in an interview. Have a gauge, but also don't hold the leash so close, because if something comes up in an interview, I always use this example. If you're interviewing Rob Gronkowski 2 years ago after the Super Bowl, and he tells you in the interview he's retiring, but you're so focused on what your next question is going to be, and Gronkowski tells you that he's retiring, and then the next one, what was it really like playing with Tom Brady to win another Super Bowl? Where you just completely missed the whole response of him telling you he's retiring. Yeah. Now, most likely the next day you're out of a job. So it's knowing when to listen and how to listen and how to ask good questions. It's something I work on every single day. It's something that I don't think anyone perfects, but Dan Patrick and Rich Eisen and Colin Cowherd would be the top 3 people on my I want to talk with list.
Yeah, that's 3 great ones right there. One thing I like to do is I like to say it back to them when I'm trying to search for the right thing to say. If they cut me off guard and I'm kind of off my game plan, I repeat what they said back to me as I'm trying to think of what I want to transition into. So there's another little tip for you from a wrestling podcast guy.
Yes.
But man, that's it's very cool, and there's so much open to you, and I'm rooting for you. And I told you before we got started, you caught my eye big time. However we crossed paths originally, you caught my eye big time, and I'm rooting for your success. And I think that you are on the path to it, and you're doing an amazing job. So before we wrap it up, please share with the listeners of Diamond Conversations where they can find everything going on in your world. Whether it's the ice cream shop, whether it's your social media, websites, writings, podcasts, please, the floor is yours. Take the platform and run with it.
Well, thank you again for having me. It was always great catching up with you. By the way, I see you're wearing a baseball hat. Who's the team on the hat?
Okay, so now I'm going to throw that. So I if you can see around my neck, I wear my Mets chain. Okay. But I'm kind of going through a midlife crisis. I'm in the retro baseball hat phase of my my career here. So I don't know if you can see. It's the 1973 Cleveland Indians. So it's usually a Montreal Expos, a Mets hat, but now I got the Cleveland Indians, and coming soon the Toronto Blue Jays. So I'm in the midlife crisis phase.
I love baseball hats. I know I have like a Cubs hat over there that I love. I'm a big supporter of wearing other teams' hats, even though, I grew up a Yankee fan now, a fan of the Royals. So still it's, I can wear any baseball hat if I like the look of it. So I give you credit. But again, you can follow me on all social media, just at Alex Feuz, my name, Feuz. And you can read my work on burlingtonroyals.com. There's a couple articles up there as well. And you can listen to the Whole Story podcast on wherever you can get podcasts. So once again, thanks so much for having me on the show today. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, absolutely. And now I'm looking at the way I look on camera here. You made me mess up my whole deal with my sunglasses and my headphones. It's a whole gimmick I got here. That's my piece of the wrestling world I carried over to the baseball podcast. I bring the gimmick with me. So I do the interview in the vein of how I would do the wrestling interviews. So you
got to protect your gimmick at all times for sure.
You made me mess it up. That's all right. But no, I appreciate you coming on, man. And if you want to follow this show, it's at Diamond Convo on Twitter. And for me, it's at Chad EMB, now on Instagram as well.
Ooh, there you
go. Hey, big deal. I'm too old for it. I don't get it, but we're going to keep trying. So Alex, all the best to you. And we'll catch you on the next time here on Diamond Conversation.
Promotional consideration paid for by the following.
Place to Be Nation's JT Rosero and Chad Campbell here. We want to let you know that we have over 24 podcasts available on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, and PlaceToBeNation.com. We now offer them to you on 2 great feeds. On the Place to Be Nation Wrestling feed, we dive into topics running the gamut from today's WWE to the glory days of yesteryear and the ins and outs of the territory days. In addition to our full-length shows, we also deliver to you special pod blasts on topics old and new.
The Place to Be Nation Pop feed is a veritable treasure trove of great content. Offer tremendous shows covering the land of movies, television, life, comics, and sports, brought to you by the most knowledgeable and insightful folks in the podcast world.
You can find all these great shows, plus archives of our past podcasts from over the past 8 years as well by subscribing to both feeds on iTunes. And while you're there, be sure to rate and leave feedback as well. All of these shows, plus others, available on PlaceToBeNation.com, where we cover pro wrestling, sports, movies, comics, plus in-depth search projects, and much more. Be sure to support our site by using www.PlaceToBeNation.com/Amazon when doing your online shopping. And we want to thank our friends at Boneheads Wing Bar, ProWrestlingOnly.com, and TheHistoryOfWrestling.com as well. Be sure to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Tumblr. PlaceToBeNation.com, the only place to be in your pop culture